Okay, well, good evening and welcome everyone to the first talk of 2016 for, spiritual science as social activism. And we're starting off a triple header called spiritual evolution. Yes, there's so much around this juicy topic that there's no way I was going to try and pack it into one evening. So, over the next three evenings, over the next 6 weeks, we will be delving into this subject. And the subtitle to this is called The Origins of Life, Matter, and Our Solar System. Oh, and then I tacked on, and the universe. See if we can fit the universe in there too. I think hopefully we'll fit the universe in. But it's certainly a topic that has been of interest really forever for humans here on this plane of existence, trying to understand and make some sense of what this is all about. Because in some regards there's really no indication. There's like no billboard there that says, this way to the truth and the answer of it all, and this is the meaning of it, and so forth. But looking back through history, we could say that every culture, every civilization has had their way of coming to terms with the question around their origins, be it through some sort of religious imagery and stories. Of course, mythologies from all corners of the earth have presented pictures to give people a sense of meaning and even direction to their lives. And our time is no different. But it's a bit of a hodgepodge, which is both positive and negative. I think in the name of freedom, it's a positive thing that we have the freedom to decide and choose and come up with our own sense of what's going on. As I like to say, in the beginning God created humans, and since then humans have been recreating God in many different forms and many different faces. But at this time there is a real fragmentation of views and ideologies, and the predominant one for a lot of people really is this scientific image that has come and picked up steam and really since the time of the Renaissance in a new form, where science has, with the development of technology and the application of logic and reason, has been able to determine a lot of things about the material realm. And for that we should be quite thankful. It has produced all sorts of wonderful things in the realms of medicine and technology and so forth. But at the same time, we've never had such a time where it's so wholly materialistic, and really, in some ways, a complete dismissal of the past that regarded there to be some sort of spiritual aspect to life. Because the material science of today really, by their own standards, have said, well, we're just looking at what we can see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, or theorize about. So by definition, that is the realm of investigation. So within that context, there isn't any room for something invisible, something of a spiritual nature, a higher intelligence, God, whatever you want to call it. So this is really unprecedented in the history of civilizations. And as I said, there's a positive side to this because it is, in a way, since the Renaissance, been a renewal, kind of a shedding of the old skin of dogma and superstition and the whole load of things that have been brought from the past. But at the same time, we don't want to completely dismiss the legacy of rich spiritual ideas and imagery from the past, which has, as I said, been usually the domain of religion in earlier times. But now we have a very exciting prospect of being able to take this arm of society known as science and work with it, and then also expand upon it with this other arm of our spiritual nature. As we were joking about before, things like intuition and imagination and the subjective experience that we have as human beings. Because it is the aim of science to be completely objective, to completely separate out ourselves from the phenomenon of experience so we can analyze it and understand it. But in doing that, taking that road of quantitative science that began with Newton, for the most part, has had something of a casualty. And that casualty is you and me. Because we have cut out our subjective experience and the qualitative experience of life. And I like to joke about how scientists, spend so much time looking into the barrel of microscopes and telescopes that they're really getting tunnel vision. They're not seeing the larger picture. They're kind of not seeing the forest for the trees because they have this mindset, this meme. There's really a meme within the scientific world. And it's interesting, that word meme that I used was first coined by Richard Dawkins, who you may know is the fellow who wrote The God Delusion. And, I'm not necessarily on board with the God Delusion, but I like that word meme because, it identifies how certain trends of thinking and mindsets can dominate. And that word dominate is an important word because we do get dominated by the ideologies that are predominant within a culture. And so the question that I'm raising right at the front here is, what is science doing to us? What is this growing meme doing to us? Because the casualty really is the sense of self and identity that you have and I have that has been really cut off at the knees. Because up to this point, most humans have felt there is some sort of divine being, there's some sort of divine purpose, and that we are divine. That we are divine. Now, with science, it's wonderful that we can look out into the universe with the Hubble telescope and whatnot, and we can see galaxies beyond, beyond, beyond. But as our reach expands, somehow our sense of self is shrunk. Ironically. Where, when you are taught, beginning in grade school, right through to higher education, university, that we're really just a material thing and a tiny little speck in the universe, and that's about it. So there is no sense of the divine or sacred within our secular science. So spiritual science is an opportunity to blend the two together. It's not about going back into ancient belief systems and whatnot, but going forward, because science isn't finished in its renaissance. Science is sort of at a little bit of a hiccup here, where it's got this ceiling where it can't get beyond and just the material world. But I think because they want everything to be empirically tested and so forth. But we know from all sorts of anecdotal evidence that people still continue to have experiences beyond this realm, be it through a near-death experience, be it through contact with people who have died, be it through the use of psychoactive substances such as ayahuasca or things like that, that there is something beyond the threshold that's there at the limitations of the physical world and of our physical senses. Well, why does this really matter? Why does it really matter that we develop for ourselves a balanced viewpoint and ideology for ourselves and for our culture? Well, it can boil right down to practical things like your health care. Because the health care within a society is going to be determined by the politics of that society, and which is influenced by the economics, where the money's going to flow, and that's going to be influenced by the ideology and what is valued. So, for example, in our time here in Canada, in Ontario, the medical community does not believe in anything like life energy or chi, and things like that, or homeopathy, things that they consider just woo-woo and ridiculous. And if you believe in something like that, you're dealing in pseudoscience, and they can be very aggressive in how they speak about these other things that have been with us for centuries, such as in Chinese medicine, how they work on the subtle levels of the body and the qi and so forth. So the healthcare that you have access to is determined by the picture that we carry of ourselves. So yes, we can all be made to suffer in a way through this. Let me just keep going here. Before I get too far ahead with that, I want to just back up a bit to talk about in the beginning. Because in the beginning, according to the gospel of modern science, which is sometimes referred to as scientism by people like Rupert Sheldrake, in the beginning was the Big Bang. Okay, the Big Bang theory has pretty much become, commonly accepted, at least within the scientific community, and that's what's taught, grade school right through university. So this really got its momentum about 100 years ago. And you may not know it, but we just finished celebrating the centennial of Albert Einstein's declaration of the general theory of relativity, and E equals mc squared. Yeah, last year was the centennial of that, and so I thought we spent a little time just kind of breaking it down and looking at its component parts. Spend the rest of the evening just talking about this. Is that a little bit daunting? If you find that daunting, it's okay. I've got something to make it a little bit easier. My cheat sheet from high school examinations. I had that stuffed up my sleeve when it came to physics class. Actually, I like this picture I got off the internet. It has some mathematical equations on the one side and then stars and galaxies on the other. And that's really been the thrust of astronomical physics. For the past 100 years, is try to bring a mathematical understanding to the universe, to try and interpret it mathematically. And so, with the general theory of relativity opening up the door to gravitational theories, people arrived at the idea of this Big Bang theory, that everything began as a singular point. Our universe began as a singular point, thousands of times smaller than the head of a pin. This is what's taught. This is what's believed. And because of the pressure of that caused this explosion of the universe outward. And back in the 30s, a man named Edwin Hubble, whom we have the Hubble telescope named after, proposed through a scientific paper that galaxies further away were moving faster, so this was proof that the universe is expanding and continues to expand. So that's the standard idea, is that there's a big bang from a singular point out, and the universe is expanding. Period. That's kind of it in a nutshell. There's really nothing else. There's nothing woo-woo about it. There's no angels or God or divine beings or so forth. So this has opened up a century of theoretical astronomy, from the blackboard math to supercomputers, trying to really map it all out mathematically. And so this has led to other theories, other ways of explaining things, such as black holes in the universe, and dark matter, and dark energy, none of which can be seen, but it's all mathematically explained or theorized, that there's black holes and dark matter and the dark matter, in fact, makes up 96% of the universe. So something that's not even seen or can be measured is attributed to 96% of the universe. So one has to wonder if scientists aren't kind of hiding behind these ideas and terminology and trying to explain things that they can't explain, because they haven't got the instruments, they haven't got the ideas necessarily to explain it, explain the strange behaviors of the universe, which in fact leads to strange behavior of scientists. Have you ever gone online and read science blogs and discussions and things like this? It's crazy. It really can be strange social behavior amongst scientists, which they don't seem to care about, because they don't really take into consideration their own beingness, or what you might call moral behavior. And this is part of what's the casualty of the current meme and view of things, is that humans somehow don't seem to fit into the equation. Or there's nothing of a moral nature to life and the universe. It's all just matter. A lot of it's invisible and unmeasurable, but it's all mathematically fits there into the equations. I came across something quite recently, just before the holidays began. So I spent quite a bit of my time over the holidays exploring something called the electric universe. Anybody here familiar with the electric universe? This is a fairly new proposed idea that had its seeds in the previous century, around the 1950s. Can't remember the name of the gentleman who wrote a paper about that, but the idea is that the universe is electric. And gravity is not the only force at work. Right now it's all about gravity and gravitational fields and magnetic fields. But in this electric universe paradigm, the idea is that there's actually electricity everywhere. And this electricity works with the plasma matter of the universe. And so there's electrical fields that are actually at work with the mass in the universe and the gases in the universe that is bringing about the configuration of these amazing planets and stars and galaxies and our sun. And from what I've been viewing, there's of course lots on the internet and lots of videos and documentaries about this, seems quite impressive that a lot of the anomalies and the things that are not explainable through the conventional theories of E equals mc squared and gravitational fields and black holes are all explainable when you start to look at it through this new lens of an electric universe, including the sun. That the sun is not actually a thermonuclear reactor that's burning fuel from its core, because we don't even know if the sun has a core. That's just all been mathematically theorized and put forth. But in this new paradigm, this ball of gas, the sun, is actually drawing electricity from the galactic fields and burning the plasma that way, kind of like a neon tube. And so within this paradigm of the electric universe, the sun is actually, in a sense, an electric light. And they have gone to show how all these different things in the standard model, which is sort of patchy. It's like, well, we don't understand this, so there's a black hole. We don't understand this, so it's dark energy. Well, we don't understand this, so it's dark matter. And it's getting a little bit like a house of cards, which these scientists say is going to collapse. This model the old model that's been developing for 100 years is so full of error that it's going to collapse. And this new idea of an electric universe has very solid answers. Matter of fact, when you look at Mars, which there's a lot of interest in, and they're trying to figure out what are these markings on Mars. Water, are these rivers that were there at one time that created these grooves and so forth? There's a very interesting documentary called The Thunderbolt Project. If you want to get into this, there's a Thunderbolt Project, and there's three parts to it. They're each about an hour. And part 2 is exclusively looking at Mars to show that these markings on Mars are from electricity, from electric bolts hitting the planet. And it makes perfect sense. The welts and the grooves and so forth, they really do look like there's been some sort of electrical charge hit the planet. And it fits within this idea of an electric universe, that electricity is there and is being drawn in by planets. And the fellow who developed this Thunderbolt project, David Talbot, his background is actually in comparative mythology. So that's his PhD, his realm of expertise. And in the first part of this documentary, he really talks about the mythologies that regarded there to be electricity or thunderbolts and things like this as part of the universe that we live in. So I'd highly recommend looking at that. The first part is the mythology, the second part is Mars, and the third part is about comets. And comets are the most mysterious part of the universe, actually, and scientists have kind of just reduced them to dirty snowballs. But they're not snowballs at all. They're not just frozen ice. They are a product of the electric universe. And you can see that in the shape of comets. So, David Talbot's work, and there's also the work of Wal Thornhill, who's got some interesting talks on YouTube about the electric universe. And the reason I find it so interesting is because it feels like that's beginning to build a bridge back to some of the older ideas, that there are more forces at work than just gravity that's holding things together. These amazing stellar configurations of galaxies are being held together through electrical fields. And if you start to look into the nature of electricity from a spiritual perspective, electricity is very interesting because it's a strong power, and where there's power, there's spirit. We're going to get into this a bit more when we start to look at the spiritual, scientific view of things.
Can I say one thing about
Hello.
electricity? Or
Yeah.
is it, I just recently actually was a science class, and we discussed what's the difference between electricity as a force compared to gravity as a force. Well, in gravity is just attraction. The electricity is also the attraction. And that's interesting.
Yes, attraction, repulsion. Yeah.
The repulsion aspect of what could happen to create whatever difference, then things come together, things come apart.
Yeah. Well, it feels like the current standard model of things is about to go through a revision, which is good because it's kind of stuck with this patchy perspective, including questions around the fate of the universe. It started with the Big Bang. There's a beginning. Of course, they don't know what was before the beginning, and they don't know what was around that tiny little point. But somehow in the beginning there's the Big Bang, so what's going to happen in the end? It depends on what camp you want to be with. It could be that this expanding universe is going to run out of gas, and the stars are going to run out of fuel, and so one by one, the light of the stars are going to go out, and then they're all going to turn into black holes, and then eventually the black holes are going to disappear. So that's called the big freeze. Then there's something I call the big fry, where there's a possibility of overheating of the universe, and that brings it to the end. There's the big crunch theory, where the expansion's going to reverse, and then it's all going to collapse back in on itself, back down to that tiny little point. And then there's something called the big bounce, where it contracts and then expands again, and contracts again and expands again, which I kind of like that one, because I think, things got to keep going, because I've got a lot of stuff I want to do and experience. So, I don't want any final ends to this rock show. It's kind of just like a rock show with lots of fancy lights and pyrotechnics. But, I don't want it to end, and it's like there was no meaning or value to this whole thing. It's just going to, collapse on itself and, pack everything up, and that's the end of it. And then there's the big rip, which I call the big rip-off, because that's where the finite and the infinite rip apart. There's critical mass, and there's this ripping apart of the finite and the infinite, and it's just a big rip-off because there's no meaning to it all. It just comes to an end. And it's like scientists' view of life. They say you die, you're dead. That's it. Gone. Your life's over. There's no afterlife. Well, where do the dead go? Their physical body, yes, it's dead. It's in the grave. But, I don't know. Don't we need to consider that maybe there is something after and beyond? So all of the views of the current scientific model are based purely on a materialistic mindset. That it's just matter and it don't matter what life's about. Really, this numerical or mathematical view of things is not necessarily a new thing. It's not a new approach. It really could be considered just another octave of what has been looked at as including also a spiritual dimension to it. And science is not paying tribute to that fact, that through history, the sacred mystery schools have always had some component that looked at astronomy, that looked at geometry, that worked with the mathematics of things. Look at the Persians, the Egyptians, the Platonic schools, even more recently, the Freemasons. Freemasons, as a spiritual stream that really has an appreciation for the math and the geometry of things, and they hold it within a sacred context. But we don't hold it in a sacred context anymore. We hold it in our supercomputers and in our brains, which we think our brains are just supercomputers, and that's it. And I had this debate with my 15-year-old niece over the holidays, because we're having Christmas dinner together, and my sister said, "Oh, Paige, would you like to say the blessing?" So the first thing out of her mouth is, "Oh, there is no God, there is no religion sucks, there's nothing but the brain." And that's how we bless the Christmas dinner. And so that opened up some nice dinner table conversation, of course. I was sitting right across from her, and I said, "Did you know that you do most of your thinking outside of your body?" Of course, that got her attention. Oh. I like to blow the mind of teenagers. I said, "Your brain's really nothing more than a kind of a glorified ATM." What's Uncle Jesse talking about? I said, "Yeah, it's just a computer, that can access the internet, like your brain is just a point of access to all the knowledge that's out there, and you just got to make sure you got all your chips firing, and you got the right software upgrades, She started thinking about that. It's like, yeah, I said, take care of that brain because you need it so you can think with your mind. So I look forward to the next conversation and see where that went. So, these ideas around things starting as a point and expanding outward. That's not really new. That's really just kind of basic geometry. I mean, that's what the ancient Vedic traditions have been meditating on for centuries. That things started as a point and moved outwards. And I always like to lead people through this kind of exercise where you think of one point. You think of one point, has no dimension, zero dimensionality. That's the starting point, zero dimensionality. And then if you add a second point, then you've got a line. You've got one dimension. You've got length. Then you could add a third point. Oh, okay, so now we have length and we have height. We have two dimensions in the triangle. And if you add a fourth point, then you have some sort of quadrilateral, right? You could make it three-dimensional if you want, and that'd be like a cube or a box of some kind. And then you can keep adding more points. So you have a pentagonal thing and a hexagonal thing and a heptagonal thing. And you keep adding points. That initial point becomes what? Becomes a circle. You start off with a single point and you keep adding points. All shapes desire to eventually become a circle. From the singularity of one point to the wholeness of the circle. So this idea of things starting as a point has kind of been plagiarized by the scientists from the ancient traditions. And they're not giving credit to where this idea came from. It's like they had to go through this whole thing of Einstein and MC square and boards of things that come back to something that we've had already. That's really destroying us in some ways. And part of the problem is that there are indeed forces at work that want to oppress us. You want to talk about dark energy. Let's talk about dark spiritual energy. That's at work, that does want to oppress human consciousness. And that's why I really liked Graham Hancock's talk on the war on consciousness, which the TED Talk that got deleted from the TED Talk YouTube channel, because it wasn't scientific and that. But I mean, it's all part of this war on consciousness. And Rupert Sheldrake, who shared the stage at that TED Talk with Graham Hancock, he's talked about his scientism as the new dogma. And we know how dogmas can be oppressive to the human spirit. And this is really in line with what Rudolf Steiner talks about, is how, with the development of intellect, and you just develop your intellect without harnessing it to your spiritual nature, which has a moral and ethical component to it, there's a danger of the evil genius syndrome. Yeah, where you have this brain power, you have this ability to think, but you don't have any moral compass, you don't believe in anything like karma, you're just following logical proceedings, and you can be actually puppeted by dark energies as a result. You think you're thinking your own thoughts, but you might be thinking other thoughts being given to you, and you're being led by the nose. And so there's a real danger here that we could plummet into a new dark ages. We've reached such a pinnacle, but it's a godless pinnacle. We're at the top of the mountain. There's like somebody up there with the tablet at the top of the mountain, and there's nothing. There's nothing really to say other than E equal MC squared. So, yeah, this predominant paradigm is really a climate that's hostile to spiritual experience and knowledge and new discoveries. As a matter of fact, pages on Wikipedia regarding the electric universe are taken down. Yeah. There's a team of paid people at Wikipedia that are paid to censor very closely what goes into Wikipedia. And there's battles. Stuff gets taken down. People put it up again. It gets taken down. It's not the people's encyclopedia the way you think. It's highly censored. And it's highly aligned with the scientific paradigm up to date. And I understand that. I understand that Wikipedia wants to be considered not just something that's hack. They want to be considered highbrow. They want to be respected. Because in the beginning it was like, well, don't go to Wikipedia because you're going to get false information there. It's, just people putting their opinions up. So I understand their objective is to make themselves credible. But in the meantime, they censor anything that doesn't line up with the party line of the current scientific model, and it'll be deleted. And you'll find that sort of stuff on there's another website, where anybody who's doing something different is considered pseudo-scientist. Like that term gets thrown around a lot. You're a pseudo-scientist. You're a quack. You're into woo-wooism. If you say anything that goes outside of that materialistic box. And that's really an injustice. That's really an injustice on the rest of us, because what is science? Science is, the word means to know. Science is about knowledge. And anybody who's a seeker is a scientist. We're all scientists here. You're here seeking knowledge. So just because you might believe in, higher beings or, a divine intelligence, doesn't mean that you're a pseudoscientist. It's so interesting, Richard Dawkins talks about in his book, The God Delusion, about how people were pressured into religious belief in the past through the dogmatism of religion. You were pressured to think a certain way, otherwise you'd be excommunicated, you'd be ostracized from your church, your temple, out of your family. So there's a lot of pressure to just put your money in the plate and look
But
good.
that's how religion
But
got bigger.
the same thing could be said about science today. That there's this dogmatism that you've got to speak, in the religious speak of science. Otherwise, you're going to get excommunicated from the scientific community. You're going to lose your funding. You're going to lose your tenure. You're going to get kicked out of your job. It's going to affect your family, your community. So, ironically, the thing's switched around now that this myth of materialism is oppressing consciousness. So this is why spiritual science is about social activism. It's about allowing ourselves to continue in this renaissance, to again go beyond the barrel of the telescope and microscope and the tunnel vision there, to see, well, as I say, scientists aren't seeing the forest for the geometries. Just the math of things. We need to again include our experience, our subjective experience of things, in the qualitative relationship we have to the world and phenomenon. And that's the path that Goethe, the German scientist Goethe, took in contrast to Newton. Ironically, Newton wrote more mystical papers than he did scientific papers, but nobody ever talks about that. Goethe also wrote, mystical things, but his science, which I'll be talking about a bit more in the spring when we get into reading the Gospel of Nature for spiritual literacy. I've got a talk on that coming up in the spring. We'll see how this our qualitative and subjective nature can be developed and trained. And that's what spiritual science is about. It's about developing our observation with the same clarity and exactness of science methodology, but applying that to a much broader range of experience, including that of the invisible. The different levels of our being, other than our physical, have technologies to connect with more things going on than meets the eye. So, science needs to keep growing. And one of the ways to do that is by developing our range of concepts. Because the concepts we hold act as frames or filters on our percepts, on our perceptions. Okay? Concepts help us to see, more or less. And, a simple example of that is, say someone's looking for a new car to buy, and a friend says, well, how about a red convertible? So all of a sudden the person's got the idea of a red convertible in their mind, and they begin seeing red convertibles. Have you ever had that experience? Where, there's something in your mind, all of a sudden you see it everywhere. All right? So there's this inner-outer thing that goes on. And what we have inwardly informs what we see outwardly. There's this two-way thing going on here. And I like to use the circle of wholeness. When it's twisted, it's still the circle of wholeness, but it's split into two. There's the inner and the outer. It was one. I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but it'll make more sense. But science knows this. They know through quantum physics that there is a relationship between you as the supposedly objective observer of a phenomenon. You have an influence on the subject. There's no way around it. You can put it in a test tube in a sterile lab and stand behind a lead wall or whatever. There's still an influence between what's going on in your heart and mind and what you're going to see. And that's why, scientists see all sorts of different things, contradictory things. And the alchemists, the original scientists, the alchemists of the Middle Ages and even further back into Egypt, they knew this, and that's why there was as much emphasis on the development of the self, of your inner life, your moral life. If you were wanting to transmute lead into gold, maybe you wanted to get rich quick, you actually had to purify yourself. So there was a lot of inner work, meditative work, seen in the wonderful hieroglyphs of alchemy, where symbolic you see that there is this inner life that had to be worked with so that you could have proper impact on the outer elements. And ironically, if you wanted to make gold out of lead, you had to be so pure that you didn't really want the gold. You weren't greedy. So, yeah, it's all really interesting. So, concepts and terminology are an important step in growing our ability as an instrument, as a technological instrument, to really perceive the larger picture of what's going on. So, over these 3 sessions, and really in every session, I'm introducing new concepts and terminology. And really important one when it comes to spiritual evolution is a concept that's not so unfamiliar, but it's the word metamorphosis. Metamorphosis, that there is always change going on, transformation from one form to another. And it takes place in stages. With things like a plant, for example, it's planted as a seed. And then the next stage is roots go down and a bud goes up. Next stage, leaves come out, so photosynthesis can take place. The stalk goes up. Then there's the calyx, and the bud, and the bloom, and the seed. These stages take place really within the flow of duality, which is another really important concept, is duality. Because a plant has this dualistic flow between activity and rest. There's contraction and expansion, contraction, expansion. There is time in the light and time in the dark. There's both the inner development and the outer development. And ultimately, the biggest duality is birth and death. So, metamorphosis is these transformation through stages based on duality. And I always like to point out the fact that in duality, in the word individuality, you have duality, which from the Latin means not divided in two. To be an individual is to actually embrace duality, and out of that duality, you have recovered wholeness, oneness within yourself. But we have to work with duality in order to go through a metamorphosis. So the next concept is patterns. Patterns. Duality produces diversity. Out of duality, we have all sorts of diverse plants, diverse human beings, and so forth. This word pattern, interestingly, comes from the Greek patron, or protector, but even further back, paternal. So patterns and paternal, and in paternal we have pater, and then the Old English was fader, which is father. So there's this connection between patterns, or the paternal, and the father. And if you're a fan of Star Wars, you might recall how Luke Skywalker, he had to face Darth Vader, Dark Father. It was his father, Darth Vader, father, trying to pull him to the dark side. So when it comes to patterns, you can think of how the influence of the cosmos and the turning of the planets influencing things on Earth, that is the paternal influence. in the duality. The maternal influence, or the mother's side, we talk of matter. Matter, from mother. And the alchemists refer to the prima materia, the prime material, the prime matter, is the mother. So there, that concept is important to understand, that this idea of a sky father or an earth mother really is just recognizing that the patterning of the dynamic influences of the cosmos work upon the matter of the earth mother, and out of that something's born. Out of that duality there's this diversity, this, if you will, this desire for something whole. What is freedom? That really is the overarching theme of spiritual evolution, is to become a free, self-aware, self-directed being who, out of that freedom, can love unconditionally and thereby join in participating as part of the one body, which, at this point, the one body is not working harmoniously. We're not working together. We've got like all over the place, and that's the next concept I wanted to get to, is the idea of one body, and how we're gonna talk about the stages of spiritual evolution in a moment. But the first stage was really one body of warmth. Everything was just one body in the beginning, at least in terms of our solar system development. So our solar system, even in its diversity of the different participating members of it, it's still one organism. Our solar system is an organism, or an organization. And when you think of an organization, it's different organs that are wanting to work together in harmony. And there was something of that in the beginning of our spiritual evolution of what we have here in the immediate neighborhood of the universe. And that's what we're going towards in the future. But because of freedom, this path of freedom, it's a little bit wonky and disjointed. Talking about the beginning, let's look at the Vedic rendition of creation and how they talk about the spark that started it all, known as Agni. Agni is the god of fire, still in the Hindu tradition. And from that god source comes all forms of fire. From fire that's in your belly to break down food and turn it into fuel, to the fire of the sun, to the fire in your campfire. They considered it all came from Agni, the original spark. And these sorts of images may seem unscientific, but our ancestors actually had a different state of consciousness. Like, we're in a different stage now. In an earlier stage, they had a different state of consciousness, which was a bit more dreamy. They didn't have this gripping intellect and power of reason and so forth. It was a bit more dreamy, which actually was an earlier form of clairvoyance. So these are like dream images of these different gods, these different deities carrying different qualities and having different missions and being part of the one body. Being a member of the one body, contributing to the whole organization. So this idea of the original spark that created all substance in the beginning was that this fire descended into matter. And that's why I like the idea of electricity. You know, we're an electric universe, that there's this fire element to electricity and in matter. And so the fire has come into manifestation, and now the opposite current needs to also take place, where there's a liberation. That the fire, the spiritual fire in the beginning, needs to be liberated from matter. And that's not having dominion over it in a raping and pillaging kind of way. It's learning to master the powers that are here as humans, so that we can liberate these powers within ourselves and within all of creation. And within the Vedic or Hindu context, that liberation also leads to a kind of action that liberates us from the wheel of karma. We do right action, so ultimately we're liberated from the wheel of karma. At least that's the way that they view it. So I don't see that idea is necessarily exclusive from the Big Bang theory, you know, where there was that so much energy compacted into that center point, the center point that then expanded out into the circle. It's just they're different octaves of the same idea. And if you dissolve the words and you dissolve the images, that's really what you do. It's a dissolving practice when you work with these mandalas or these yantras. You want to dissolve the symbolism of it and the geometry and connect yourself spiritually to the essence, so you can know. To know is science. You can have a scientific experience with these sorts of things. So, but the thing with the Vedic rendition is there's this moral aspect to life. There's a moral aspect which science completely disregards. They're just looking at matter. They're just looking at molecules and stars. But we know from our experience that, and this is where you develop your powers of observation. If you look at your life and you listen to what's going on, you're going to see that there's a lot more going on than just molecules banging around. That you say something, your words have power, and they'll come around and they can bite you in the ass, or they can bring a blessing back to you. Because there is this quality to the spiritual side of things that's there. And that's why it's good to continually come back to this image of the lemniscate. That's actually called a lemniscate in geometric terms, where you've taken the wholeness and you've divided it into two. And yeah, the one side is the physical side, and the other side of the duality is the spiritual side. But they're working together. There's this circulation. That's why it's also used as the infinity symbol, because it's just infinitely going back and forth between the two sides. And we have that in our experience. When you go to sleep at night, it's not just to give your body rest and lay it in the bed. It's so that you can go back and connect with your spiritual nature, with the spiritual side, uncontaminated from physical experience and sensory input. And in the morning you wake up and you find yourself in the bed again, and you're back on the physical side, but you have some sort of like connection through your dreams, or a feeling like you were somewhere else. Because, yeah, that totality is split into two. Same with life and death. We die and we put our bodies in the ground, or somebody hopefully puts it in the ground for us, and we go into the other side, the spiritual world. And we're born into a next incarnation. If you believe in reincarnation, you come back into this side and you have an experience of this. But the two are working together because there is this moral element between the physical and the spiritual. And in the middle, between our physical life and our spiritual life, is what is known as the soul life. And that's the you of this incarnation. That's your personality, that's your emotions, that's the content of your mind, and that's what you got to work with. That's that middle part that is to be developed. So, in terms of the building blocks of creation, in the scientific camp, they have, of course, the periodic table with your 118 elements, that all make up the chemistry that goes into matter. And that's all fine and well. Like, that's pretty amazing that we have figured that out. Like, that's human ingenuity going on there. But let's not completely sweep away the classic view of the past where everything really fit into the four elements. It's either solid, liquid, gaseous, or fire, or heat, or thermal. And all the 118 elements really fit into one of those categories. And they interact with each other in this metamorphosis of matter from a solid state, liquid state, gas state, or heat. Although science doesn't really recognize fire as an element. They just recognize solid, liquid, and gas, and fire is just a thermal process or activity. So fire is not really part of their viewpoint. But in the classic view, there were these four elements, and in some cases there was this fifth element of the ether, something that wasn't actually visible. But you can see something that's solid, liquid, gas, or fire. And some people view that these elements are actually have a beingness to them. There's an intelligence, or elemental beings are behind. If you were to dissolve them in a dissolving practice, you could potentially connect with the elemental beings that are in the elements. And we can talk about where those came from in a minute. But we see these four different states actually in the planetary bodies in our solar system. So you've got, the sun is obviously the fire, or the thermal element, and then you've got the gas planets, the great gas giants of Saturn and Jupiter, and then you've got the solid planets such as Mars and Mercury and Venus, and even Uranus and Neptune are solid, but they're actually frozen ice gas. And then finally you have Earth, which is the most watery of all the planets. And so even in our solar system, we see these four different states of the elements. And it's working with these elements, it's not an antiquated idea, because you can see that's working in any kind of process, even in a group process. And this is a tool I learned a few years ago to help guiding the evolution of an idea. Because when you have an idea, that's the fire, that's the spark that lights up, but it's still just an idea. It hasn't become concretized yet. So it moves from the spark of an idea, and that may attract other people in, that warmth, that light. And then it moves into the air stage, where you begin talking about the idea. There's this exchange back and forth. Things are floating around, but it's still not concretized. And then it gets into the water stage, where things begin to coagulate. Things, try this, fitting this together, like how are you going to put it together? But it's not finished, and you want to be careful you don't force it to be finished until you have things in the right place. So you keep it a little bit fluid and mercurial. And then finally, the idea can come into solid form. It can come into a manifestation where it's finished. And so those four elements are really a handy concept to work with. You see them even in a steam engine. Steam engine has fire and air used to burn coal, which then turns water into steam, and that has the power to move a locomotive. Like just mastering the different elements in a conscious way. The next concept is the fourfoldness of life forms here on Earth. Things that you can see. Nothing woo-woo about this. We got the mineral kingdom, we got the plant kingdom, we got the animal kingdom, and we have human beings. So in the mineral kingdom, what state of elements is that? Solid. All minerals are solid. With the plant kingdom, interestingly enough, it's solid, it's made out of minerals, but it's integrated this water, this liquid state. It holds liquids in it, and that allows it to go from being like a rock into something that has life. Water brings it to this higher state of being, and there's this movement to it. Then we get to the animal kingdom. There's a relationship to air, from fish that don't need air, to birds that fly in the air, to animals that breathe air. This is something that plants don't have, and minerals don't have. Plants are actually breathed by air, but an animal can breathe air because they've evolved this apparatus of the lungs. And there's something between this air and also sentient beingness. Animals have developed this sentient consciousness. And there's something about that connection to air that's around that. And then finally, we have the human, where this connection is to fire, or warmth. And you could say that that's the spark of consciousness we have. But it's also the fact that we're warm-blooded. We have the warmth in the blood, and there's a correlation between that warmth and the consciousness that we have. It certainly gives us a sentient type of consciousness, but there's a far greater potential in terms of consciousness over what animals have. Animals are amazing, but look at an animal and go, well, if an animal's amazing, how much more amazing can a human be? So, next concept is the fourfold human being, because the human being is actually a composite of all these other kingdoms in the bodies that we have. We know our physical body is, we share that with the mineral kingdom, right? Our bones and everything that is physical. Then we have an etheric body. What gives life to our physical body? Just what gives life to a plant? It's not just the water, it's the etheric body, which has a water-like quality to it. And I know I'm now getting beyond the bounds of what you can observe in the conventional scientific means, but these are insights that can be seen if you develop the new clairvoyance, the new nuclear seeing that's beyond our physical seeing and senses. Then the human also has this air-like quality, which in some schools is called the astral body. This astral body, which gives us our sentient nature over plants. Plants don't have a sentient nature. Astral also refers to stars, astral star. And that's the part of us that connects with the planetary influences. And how they actually, the planetary influences contribute to our makeup. Which is not to say that plants aren't influenced by stars and the planets. They definitely are. And then finally, the fire part is this the spark of consciousness, the self-awareness, or what's sometimes known as the I am. That fire. So, so the human is a composite. We have the mineral in us, we have the plant in us, we have the animal in us, we have the human in us, but we also have the planets in us. And I'm going to be doing a talk in the spring called Plan, Plant, Planet. And the plan are the patterns between plants and planets. So let's keep moving here, and I'm going to unpack now some of Rudolf Steiner's rendering from the Akashic record about spiritual evolution. Because I don't have the same clairvoyance as him. He was an initiate. He was highly, some consider him like a very highly initiated human being. Partly on the development of the life that he had between 1861 and 1925. But probably had something to do with his previous incarnations as well that put him at such a stature where he was able to unpack a lot of amazing things, such as in this book here, pretty hefty tome called An Outline of Esoteric Science. That's just an outline. I don't know. I actually had to buy the study companion to go along with this because it's a pretty heavy read. This is a fantastic book, Gaiosophy, written by a Dutch fellow named Kees Zuidman, who really took a lot of Rudolf Steiner's work, which Steiner called anthroposophy. His version of spiritual science was called anthroposophy. And this gentleman did a really great job of marrying it with the conventional scientific view of things and putting it into accessible language. So I've been working with that. We're going to start talking about spiritual hierarchies. That's one of the books there. Also, cosmic memory. Oh, that's one that pertains a lot to this idea of the Akashic record. The Akashic record is a living memory of everything that's taken place on Earth. This goes far beyond what the fossil record could possibly give us information about, because fossil record depends on there being something of a solid Earth to hold the record of the past. But the Earth hasn't always been as solid as it is. It's pretty watery as it is right now, but it was even more watery before that, and it was even more gaseous before that, as we'll see in a minute. But here's a quote from Rudolf Steiner. A couple of quotes here about the Akashic record. He says, "In a spiritual sense, what is past has not really passed away, but is still there. In physical life, people have this conception in regard to space only. If you stand in front of a tree, then go away and look back at it later on, the tree has not disappeared. It is still there. In the spiritual world, it is so in regard to time. If you experience something at one moment, it has passed away the next, so far as physical consciousness is concerned, but spiritually it has not passed away. You can look back at it just as you look back at the tree." That's the Akashic record. You can look back in time and see things that took place, because it's a non-physical record. Another quote from his book Cosmic Memory. "All that arises in time originates in the eternal, but the eternal is inaccessible to sensory perception. Ways to the perception of the eternal are open to us. At a certain level of cognitive power, a person can penetrate to the eternal origin of things that vanish with time. Indeed, once we broaden our powers of cognition in this way, we are no longer limited to external evidence where cognition of the past is concerned. Then we can see in events that which is not accessible to these senses. We can see the past that time cannot destroy. Thus, we advance from transitory to non-transitory history, which is written in characters other than our ordinary history. This history is called the Akashic record." Why not? Is that so sci-fi? I mean, it seems quite reasonable to me. If I'm going to put all this effort into living and go through, the challenges of living, that, or the injustices that others put upon me, that somewhere there's a record of this. Somewhere that energy works on a moral level to keep account of what's going on. And we can access that if we develop the technology. And I don't mean the technology of a machine, but our inner technology, through the development of our subtle bodies, structure, chakras, the third eye, so forth. Everything I read from Steiner, it's about all action is recorded, just like we're recording tonight. We have the technology to record things, and tomorrow I'm going to be able to watch it. Just like my life, when I die, I'm going to be able to go and watch it, review it, and learn morally from it. Anything, there's a possibility of error in reading and interpreting things. It's dependent upon your inner state and inner development. A lot of people claim to read the Akashic record. Just because they say that, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's going to be a reliable rendering. Someone like Rudolf Steiner, who devoted his whole life to this kind of work and taught people how to develop themselves to access and enter back into the spiritual world consciously, to go across that threshold and what that meant, and the trials and tribulations and difficulties and the risks involved. He lays out a safe path of development in doing that. It's not necessarily as easy as people think, because people can be prone to delusions around things. People may think they're reading the Akashic record and say, oh, well, I was Jesus in my previous life. Well, that probably makes several hundred people that were Jesus in their previous life. Because the ego can influence how we interpret things. And so that's why the inner development is such an important part of becoming a spiritual scientist. To be a scientist doesn't really take inner development, it just takes intellectual development. But we're more than intellectual beings. Yeah, Edgar Casey, the sleeping prophet.
Yes.
Right, and then there's a certain measure of accuracy and error in what he did, which is normal. The difference with Steiner was he is proposing a path of development where we can do this consciously. Edgar Casey was a sleeping prophet, so when he came back into consciousness, he had to be told what he said. But we're moving away from that kind of clairvoyance or trance mediumship and things like that, where we can, in full waking consciousness, be able to cross that threshold and access what's on the other side. I'm going to be talking about the threshold in a talk coming up in February called Spiritual Scientific Perspective on Mental Illness. Because how we approach the threshold can really determine our state of mental well-being. It's not as easy as just tuning in and reaching across and grabbing something. We meet ourselves, in a sense. We have to meet ourselves and deal with ourselves in this path of expanding consciousness. But I won't get into that now. I want to get into something about the hierarchy of beings. That there are actually beings within the universe and in this neck of the woods that are working with us, that are also participatory in the unfolding of things in spiritual creation. Rudolf Steiner referred to them as the spiritual hierarchies. And that's sometimes a term that you have to kind of wrap your head around. Like, what does that mean? Is there a hierarchy of higher beings and middle beings and lesser beings? In a sense, yes. But this is really an important subject to go deeper into, and I'm going to be doing this more in the third of this series of talks, because these beings are also evolving. They're evolving, and it's a hierarchy in the sense that they've gone before us as well, that they've been around longer, and they've gone through stages of their own development that we're just going through now. So some of them, you could say, had their human development, their human stage of development earlier on. We're having it now, but they've gone before us, and so they're more evolved in some ways. But the other thing to remember is that when they were at a certain stage, the overall conditions and environment was different. So they developed differently than what we have the potential to develop now. And in some ways, you could say that the conditions are really great for developing certain things like love and freedom, which they didn't have at this stage. So their work with us is really important. There's a real partnership going on because they're evolving as they participate in our evolution. And as I believe it was Steiner said it this way, is that these higher hierarchies, humans are their religion.
Like they. Or do you think of some humans?
Yeah, that's kind of quite a statement. Like, that's how important we are to them in their evolution. So it's not like, nice Hallmark cards you get at the store where you got like angels, just kind of floating around and kind of throwing blessings down here and there. No, they're going through their own challenges, and it's not all a pretty picture. I'll be talking about this more, that like things have gotten off track with these other beings in the hierarchy of things, because it's central to it all is developing free will, and that can go down south at times. But within this concept of the hierarchy of beings, which science is really not into that sort of stuff. Here's a quote I got from somebody. It said, "Modern cosmology prefers to speak the precise language of mathematics. But what is to prevent us from understanding the equations of physics as abstract representations of the otherwise supersensible activity of spiritual beings? Are the two mutually exclusive?" Further, he says, "What is to prevent us from linking that which is intelligible in the universe to that which is itself intelligent?" So this is spiritual science, trying to join what we see as physical laws and patterns and activity with a hierarchy of beings that are also evolving. And within, the Steiner's rendering of the Akashic record, there is 9 hierarchies immediately above us. So we are the 10th hierarchy. We are the 10th hierarchy in this, and then of course we have the animals and the plants and the mineral kingdom following behind us, and I'll be talking more about how that works. But one can think of these hierarchical beings on different stratum. There's all these stratas of existence, and they're on different stratum, so that's why we don't have direct experience to them, and we certainly don't see them with our senses, because our senses are designed for the sense realm, looking out. If we look in more, with the technology that allows us to go into inner space, we could directly connect with these other beings. I like the analogy of how we're kind of like fish in the water. We're in that stratum, water, and then there's a threshold at the top of the water, and then the hierarchical beings are like birds, and we're down in the water, so we don't see the birds. We might like see something flower above and say, "Oh, what was that?" And you just I felt something. Yeah, it's like, yeah, never mind. There's nothing up there. But the hierarchical beings, they're in the air, and they're from a vantage point, a bird's eye view, you could say, where they can look down. They have experience of that stratum, but they can also look down into where we are. So that's kind of an analogy of our relationship to them. Now, in terms of the stages of evolution of the Earth this planet is going through stages. We talked about metamorphosis being through stages. And so the Earth is going through stages, and like a plant, plant, planet. There are 7 major stages for the Earth's evolution, and that's looking into the future as well as the past, because we're right now in the 4th of 7 stages. But the plan for the planet, just like a planet, is 7 stages or incarnations. You'd actually call them major incarnations for the Earth, because the Earth is an organism that is incarnating and reincarnating through different iterations. And even within the 7 major stages, there's sub-stages and sub-stages of that. And I'll get more into that in 2 weeks. Yes?
We're still in the Akashic records, right? This is where this knowledge comes
yes.
from? Okay.
Yeah. This is derived from Rudolf Steiner's rendering of the Akashic record. And within these 7 stages, there is what is known as manvantaras, where things come into manifestation. There's this activity, and things kind of bloom out like a plant in spring and summer. And then there's pralayas, a period of rest, such as in autumn and winter. We see that in the patterns here on Earth. Everything has this breathing out to expansion and life, activity, growth, and then a withdrawal. You see that with cycles of plants. You see that every day when you go to bed. There's this withdrawing into rest. So the manvataras is this coming into manifestation, and then the pralaya. These are Sanskrit terms. So this is an old concept. So the first stage is referred to as the ancient or the old Saturn stage. That's coming from esoteric terminology. It's the first stage, way back before prehistory, before anything of the fossil record, because the solar system was just one large ball of warmth. And the reason it's called this old Saturn stage is because that ball of warmth of our solar system extended as far as where the orbit of Saturn is currently. And during that first stage of old Saturn, this ball of warmth was there. Some of the gas, some of the warmth broke off and began as the precursor of the orbit of Saturn. And humans didn't really exist at that time. As the 10th hierarchy, we didn't really exist. We became warmth globules within this great ball of warmth, like seeds. Like seeds, but nothing like we are now. Just really like a warmth seed, and that's it. Where did this substance come from? It's not even matter. It's such a rarefied substance you couldn't even necessarily call it matter. It was the first stage of concretizing matter out of spirit, right? So instead of it being like a big bang, it was actually something was being, you could say, excreted out of spirit into matter. And in fact, it's the substance of the spiritual hierarchy. That's where the substance comes from, is actually from a variety of different beings that you could say offered their substance into this very first stage of developing the climate for the development of the 10th hierarchy for us. And so even in that picture of spiritual beings donating or offering their substance, there's something of a moral quality. That beings gave or sacrificed their substance into this Project Earth, I like to call it. I'm going to just zip to the end here because I do want to do this dissolving exercise. But I'm going to be picking this up again in 2 weeks. in the second part of this series. But just to tell you, the second stage is called the ancient sun stage, where again, after a pralaya, a rest period, there's this manvatara. And it recapitulated everything from the ancient Saturn stage and then went further. Just like plants would do. You know, plants would grow so much in the spring and summer, then they withdraw, and then the next year they go further. They recapitulate, the sap comes up from the bottom and so forth, and they take it further. So the sun stage, the second stage, took it further, and the human developed further. Instead of it just being gas, then there was the introduction of, instead of it just being warmth, then there was the introduction of gas, a gas nature that produced light. So it was at that time where there was a quality of light, but not even like we have in this sense, because it was still more in an inner sense, a spiritual sense of things, because all these things were coming from the inner spiritual world. Then the third stage, the second stage, the sun stage, is called that because that's really where we got more of a sun at the center of the solar system, and we had Saturn beginning to orbit as a gas planet, which it is, and Jupiter, the second stage. The third stage is the moon stage. It's called the moon stage because then there was actually something of an earth and a moon that came into more concrete form, because in this stage there was the introduction of a water state or a liquid state. And again, the human didn't exist anything like we are now, because it wasn't until now, the fourth stage, which is called the earth stage, that things have come into a solid state of being. But you could say in the first stage it laid the seed of the physical body, the second stage it laid the seed of the etheric body, the water type body, and the third stage it laid the seed of the astral body, and now in this fourth stage we have the seed of the fire or the ego, the I am. And that's really what we're working on right now. We have the physical body, we have etheric, astral. Now, this fourth stage, we're developing this human consciousness. And to the degree that we develop that is going to determine where we go in the following stages, the fifth and the sixth and the seventh. So, yeah, there's a lot more I could say around this, but we're out of time, and I do want to just do a brief exercise of dissolving. So what you're left with is not just intellectual ideas or somebody else's rendering from the Akashic record, but maybe something of your own experience in connecting to the essence behind the Maya, or the illusion of matter. Maya is the Sanskrit word for illusion, and how this is not illusion, but it's an illusion to think that this is all there is.